Maybe today looked completely ordinary. You did what needed to be done, replied to a few messages, smiled at a few people, said I'm okay one more time, but right now, as the screen around you dims, as it's just the steady hum of the fan and the light from your phone gently falling across your tired face, something inside you might feel very different. In your mind, there's a meeting room that never adjourns, old conversations, situations that have already passed, all the I should have, and the quiet little judgments no one else can hear. Sometimes, between two breaths, there's a small drop in your chest, just half a second, but enough to make you feel like your heart skipped a beat. And the most exhausting thing is not the world out there, but that small voice in your head that won't stop asking, am I doing something wrong somewhere? Shouldn't I be much better than this by now? You might be lying in bed right now, one hand holding your phone, the other unconsciously resting on your chest, just checking if your heartbeat is still steady. The room isn't too dark, but not fully lit either, just enough to see the shadow of the chair, the desk, the familiar corner of the wall. Everything outside is quiet, but inside, it's loud. There are fragments of memory that keep replaying on their own. An argument, a moment you said something you regret, a message you almost finished typing and then erased, an old choice that still stings a little somewhere in your chest whenever you think about it. No one sees all of that. There are things you've never even put into words with yourself. If this feels familiar, then this video did not appear by accident. It's like an empty chair in a quiet room, a place where you can sit down, slow your breathing just a little, and watch all the little storms in your mind without rushing to judge them, without forcing yourself to be strong, not to fix you, just to sit next to you for one night and look back together. Welcome to Lucid Dream, Sleep, and Science Stories. Tonight, we are not going to talk about how to succeed. We're not going to talk about 7 steps to be happier. We're not here to tell you what you should think or demand that you become positive right away. Tonight, we are only going to do one thing. Gently, slowly, walk inward into the mind and look closely at what is happening there, the way a Stoic looks at themselves, calmly, honestly, without running away. You know, each person carries their own private storm. From the outside, everyone looks fine, going to work, answering emails, scrolling the internet, smiling in a few photos. But inside, there are thoughts that have never been spoken out loud. Sadness folded up and tucked into a drawer. Moments when you felt not enough. Half-finished conversations with others. And with yourself. We are rarely taught how to live with all of that. We are taught how to try harder, endure better, strive more. But hardly anyone teaches us how to sit still with our own thoughts. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." The happiness of a lifetime sounds like something very big, but often it begins with small moments like this. The moment you pause, look at a thought that's been looping again and again, and realize, wait, this is just a thought. It's not a sentence. It's not destiny. It's not the whole of who I am. Tonight, we will gently clarify this together. You are not the thoughts in your head. Some sentences have been in your mind for so long that they've started to sound like the truth. I'm not good enough. I'm always like this. I'll probably ruin everything anyway. They repeat themselves like an old background track, playing quietly behind every choice, every relationship, every night of sleep. But if you really look at them, they're just stories the mind keeps telling on repeat, because it got used to that script. Epictetus said, "People are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them." what wears us out is not only what happened, but the way we replay it, interpret it, and judge ourselves for it, day after day. Tonight, I'm not here as some guide who understands everything. I'm just sitting here as a fellow adult who knows what sleepless nights feel like. Who knows the feeling of staring at the ceiling and wondering, there's something in me that's so tired, but I don't even know what to call it. If you'll allow it, this voice will stay with you tonight as you lie down. Pull the blanket up to your chest, feel your breath brushing softly against the air, and let your eyes slowly grow heavy. Each chapter we go through will gently touch the toxic thoughts you once believed were the truth, the unspoken pain you've never put into words, the old memories you keep rewinding, the judging voice inside that's been there for years, and something you may not have really touched in a long time, the quiet stillness within you, not to wipe everything clean, but to gently change the way you see, touch, and live with all of it. You might be wondering inside, can just listening to a video like this really change anything? To be completely honest, no one can transform your entire life in just a few hours. But sometimes, all it takes is one night, one time you sit with yourself without running away. One moment when you quietly whisper, "Oh, so all this time, I've been believing everything my mind says, and I forgot I still have the right to choose what I want to treat as true for me." For me, that moment alone is already a huge shift. Often, healing is not a grand revolution. It's one deeper breath than usual, a small softening in your shoulders, a quiet thought, maybe, I'm not as wrong as the story I've been telling myself. Throughout tonight's journey, we will not deny the past. We won't force ourselves to be positive, and we won't try to turn you into some perfect version of yourself. What we will do is notice that tiny space between stimulus and response, the place where you actually have a choice. Look directly at the unspoken pains so they no longer have to hide in the dark and control you from behind the scenes. Gently loosen your relationship with the past so it becomes a lesson, not a life sentence. Softly open a dialogue with the inner critic, that voice that keeps insisting you're never enough. And most importantly, practice sitting in a bit of stillness to see where your attention is going and what you're using to build your inner world. Marcus Aurelius once reminded, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength he speaks of is not a loud, dramatic strength, but a very quiet one. The strength of someone who is beginning to truly understand their own mind and no longer allows every passing thought to decide the worth of an entire life. So, if you're ready, find a position that feels truly comfortable for you. Lie down, take a slow breath in, and breathe out a little longer than usual. Tonight, your mind does not have to pretend to be okay. It doesn't have to be happy. And it doesn't have to be strong. It only needs to be honest. Let lucid dream, sleep, and science stories stay with you for the next few hours, like a friend sitting at the edge of your bed, not asking who you must become, just gently whispering, we're going to slowly look at what's happening in your mind. And remember that you are not just your thoughts. You are the one sitting here, listening, noticing, and little by little, choosing to live differently. If your breath has already slowed a little, if your eyes are beginning to want to close, then let's begin. There are days when nothing particularly bad happens. No one scolds you, no accidents, no big crises. But at the end of the day, when all interactions pause for a while, you suddenly realize you're tired in a very strange way. Tired from what's echoing inside your own head. It's not one clear thought, but a string of small sentences, fragmented, layered on top of each other. I should have done better. Why am I still like this? I think I'm falling behind. They come and go, but each one leaves a very thin scratch, not deep enough to knock you down, but enough to make something inside always feel slightly sunken, as if your sense of worth has just been pulled down one notch. You don't tell anyone. Many times, you don't even really tell yourself. You just get used to it. Used to always having some judging voice in your head. So used to it that you start to think, maybe I really am just like that. What's strange is this. We often absolutely believe any thought that appears in our mind simply because it's in my head. It automatically carries enormous weight. A line pops up, I'm not good enough. Immediately, we don't see it as just a line, but as a verdict. An old feeling surfaces. I'll probably fail anyway. Instead of seeing it as fear, we let it define the entire future over time. The thoughts that repeat most often start to look like the truth. We can no longer tell where me ends and where the noise I've heard for too long begins. The Stoics looked very directly at this point. Epictetus said, in the notes he left for his students, people are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. If we take this sentence out of the books and drop it straight into everyday life, it becomes a very gentle reminder. What happened is one thing. The way I retell it to myself is another. Asterisk, the event may have ended long ago, but the story in our head keeps going. Sometimes someone says a casual line, but the mind builds an entire script, so I must be useless. Sometimes something small doesn't go our way, but the thought that comes along with it is, of course, I ruin everything. Like always, we rarely stop to ask, is this really me, or just an old habit repeating itself? We simply hand it the right to become who we are. Marcus Aurelius, who devoted an entire book, Meditations, to talking with his own mind, wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. The soul will take on the color of the thoughts it regularly embraces. Not every thought is neutral in color. Some thoughts are tinted with judgment, with self-diminishing, with doubt toward oneself. If day after day we keep absorbing those colors, the soul slowly gets stained to match, and at some point, we begin to confuse that temporary shade with our true nature. Notice this, even in Marcus's sentence. Thoughts are just the color, not the entire fabric. You are the fabric. What you think is only what's temporarily covering it. There's another subtle misunderstanding. We assume that, because I reacted that way, my nature must be like that. Someone says something, you feel hurt, you go quiet. You withdraw from the conversation. Then, in your head, you stick on a label. I'm the weak type. I don't dare face things. A plan gets left unfinished. You haven't started yet. Or you started and quit halfway. The mind concludes immediately. I'm someone who never follows through, who will never achieve anything. What's worth noticing here is not the event itself, but how quickly we jump from behavior to identity just because of a few reactions. We turn them into our entire identity, as if that's all we are. Meanwhile, between stimulus and response, between what happens and how we answer, there is always a tiny gap. People rarely talk about this gap, but that is exactly where freedom begins. The moment you see, I'm about to react in my usual way, and in that split second, you realize you could choose differently. You might still be clumsy. You might not do much yet, but the moment you can see that gap, your inner life has already started to change. The Stoics never tried to erase all thoughts. They didn't pretend. They were never afraid, never insecure, never angry. They did something else. They placed themselves in the position of the observer. They looked at the mind as a flowing stream made of emotions, memories, thoughts, judgments, fears, hopes, all appearing, changing, disappearing. And behind that stream, there is a quieter place, a calmer vantage point that is the real me. Marcus Aurelius reminds himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength he speaks of is not the power to control everything outside, but the strength of repositioning yourself inside. You are not each wave crashing in your head. You are the deeper sea beneath, watching each wave come and go. If we bring all of this down to a very ordinary question, it would be, how do I stop blindly believing everything my mind throws at me? Not by arguing with every single thought. If you keep debating, you'll get lost in an endless conversation with yourself, and not by ordering yourself from tomorrow on. I must think positive, because the more you force it, the more the mind resists. Asterisk, you can try something different, gentler but deeper, whenever a self-judging thought appears. Instead of stepping into the role and believing it instantly, take half a step back inside and simply acknowledge, here comes that same old story again. This is the voice that's been repeating for years. This is not all of me. It's just one layer of habit in my mind. No need to argue about right or wrong. Just recognize you are listening to a voice, not hearing your own absolute truth. This tiny distinction, if repeated many times, will slowly open up a new inner space, where you are less dragged around by every wave of thought, and begin to realize you have the right to choose what to believe, which lines to give weight to, and which ones to let pass. You might think, but if I don't trust my thoughts, what do I rely on? The answer is not, don't trust anything, but this. Learn to distinguish between thoughts born from fear, comparison, and thoughts that come from calm, honesty, and self-respect. Both exist in your mind, but they carry a completely different texture. Toxic thoughts tend to pull you downward, make your chest sink, make everything ahead look heavy and blurry. Healthy thoughts, even when they ask you to honestly examine your mistakes, still carry a bit of warmth, a feeling of, I can do better, and I deserve another try. The Stoics did not deny that they were wrong, but they didn't use their mistakes to define their final worth. They treated thoughts as tools, not as masters. Tonight, if you can pause, even just a little, from believing every single sentence in your head, and simply watch them pass by, you are already practicing one of the most basic Stoic steps, stepping out of the defendant's chair in the courtroom your own mind has built, and sitting down in the quiet seat of the observer. From that seat, perhaps for the first time in a long while, you'll see clearly, some thoughts are nothing more than old stories. Some thoughts are just echoes of other people's voices, and there is a part of you, quieter, clearer, still watching all of it without judgment. That part is the one that is truly you. In the next parts, we'll go deeper into each layer, the toxic thoughts that loop again and again, the unnamed pains, the ghosts of the past, the inner judging voice, and how to gently rebuild stillness and intentional attention. But to begin, you only need to remember one very small thing. Like a whisper you leave for yourself tonight, the things that appear in my mind are just thoughts, and I am the one sitting here, watching them come and go, and little by little, learning not to let them decide my whole life for me. Once you begin to understand that I am not every thought in my head, another question usually arrives very quickly. So what am I supposed to do with the terrible, repetitive thoughts? Because no matter how much theory you understand, the reality is still this: there are self-judging sentences that keep coming back, right at your weakest moments. Lines like, "I'm not good enough, I'll probably never change, this is just the kind of person I am." They don't show up just once. They become a kind of mental background music you've been listening to for years. And what exhausts you is not only the content of those sentences, but the war you declare on yourself every time they appear. Stop thinking nonsense. I have to be more positive. Don't be weak anymore. You get stuck between two sides. On one side, the toxic thoughts; on the other, the whip of self-criticism for even daring to have those thoughts. There is a truth that stings a little, but is also very freeing. Sentences like "I am not enough, I will always be this way," are not absolute truths about who you are. They are stories repeated so many times that the mind can no longer tell the difference. Somewhere in the past, maybe someone said something about you. Maybe it was a careless criticism, an offhand comparison, a judgment that seemed to pass by, but the mind recorded it. It replayed it. It turned it into a label. Over time, the outer voice went quiet. Only the inner voice remained, and you started to believe you were born that way. Jung once said a line that I think fits this part very well. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." If you look closely, this sentence does not deny the past. It doesn't say what happened to you means nothing. It simply quietly reminds you that the events that happened, the words that were spoken, the wounds you received, all of them are part of your history, but they are not the whole of you. You are not defined by what others have done to you, or by your old versions of yourself from when you did not yet know enough, were not yet mature enough, did not yet have many choices. You are defined much more by what you choose to believe next, by how you treat yourself from this moment on, by the small directions you choose each day. And yet, every time a toxic thought appears, we tend to do the opposite. We treat it like a verdict. We take it as the real truth. We give it the right to define our entire path. For example, you fail at something at work. Instead of simply acknowledging, "Okay, this time I didn't do as well as I wanted," the mind chooses a hammer sentence: "I am a failure," from one specific situation. The thought jumps straight to a sweeping conclusion about your identity, and then, instead of examining what you might do differently, you sink into guilt and shame, and let the sentence, "I am a failure," become a track on infinite repeat. People often tell each other, "Just stop thinking negatively." On the surface, it sounds reasonable, but in reality, trying to not think about something usually makes it stand out even more. The more you remind yourself, "Don't think you're not enough," the more the sentence, "I'm not enough," gets repeated one more time in your head. The more you force yourself to be positive, the wider the gap grows between what you truly feel and what you show on the outside, until you start to feel fake even with yourself, not because you're bad, but because that way of dealing with it is just too tiring. Stoicism does not teach us to force every negative thought to disappear. They did not sit there chanting, "Everything is fine, everything is good, just be happy." They chose something else: observation. Observation, not to analyze every detail, but to see clearly. This is just one kind of thought. It is not a command. It does not force me to obey. Epictetus reminded his students that we cannot control which thoughts appear, but we can learn not to sign a contract with all of them. You can imagine your mind as a garden. In that garden, there are plants you truly want to grow: self-respect, honesty, the ability to admit your mistakes without destroying yourself, the belief that you can still grow better. but at the same time, there are also plenty of weeds, old beliefs, judgments you picked up from others, hasty conclusions you once slapped on yourself on very exhausted days. Weeds don't disappear just because you hate them. The more you stand in the middle of the garden, staring at the weeds and yelling, "Go away, go away, why are you still here?" the more they stay. You're the only one getting more drained. The garden doesn't need someone screaming. The garden needs someone who can see clearly. Ah, this part is weeds. Ah, this part is a plant I want to keep. Ah, that corner needs to be cleared a bit. And then, little by little, you start to tend it, not by hacking everything down in one night, but by pulling out a few weeds each day, giving a bit more soil, a bit more water, a bit more light to the plants you truly value. It's the same in your inner life. Pulling out weeds is not yelling at yourself every time a negative thought appears. Pulling out weeds begins with the ability to recognize, to look at a thought and call it by its name, to tell which parts are old beliefs, which parts are borrowed voices from other people, and which parts are what you truly want to keep. For example, when a line like, "Look at you, you've never done anything worthwhile," shows up, instead of immediately believing it, you can pause for a beat and quietly say to yourself, "This is the kind of self-demeaning thought I've gotten used to hearing for many years." Just that. You don't have to rush to prove that you are capable. And you don't have to instantly come up with 10 counter-arguments. At first, it's simply about recognizing this is a patch of weeds in the garden of my mind. When you no longer confuse weeds with plants, you've already made it halfway. A common mistake when people begin to work with their thoughts is trying to replace everything with positive sentences they themselves don't believe. Asterisk. While it still hurts inside, their mouth has to repeat, "I'm amazing, I'm fine, everything is great." This lack of alignment makes the mind even more tired. You don't need a bright, glossy coat of paint over a wall that's still damp. The Stoics chose a gentler way. Instead of forcing themselves to think differently right away, they practiced living differently, little by little. They let small actions become the new evidence, and only then does the mind gradually adjust its story. But to get there, we have to pass through this very quiet step first, seeing toxic thoughts clearly without having to fight them. Tonight, you don't need to purify your entire mind. You only need to do one very small thing, like a subtle exercise for your inner life. Pay attention to which self-judging sentence repeated the most throughout your day. It might be, "Why am I always like this? They're probably tired of me. No one really needs me anyway." Pick just one. Asterisk then, instead of trying to stop it from appearing, just notice it every time it comes back. Ah, here it is. The old story. Asterisk, you don't have to believe it. You don't have to argue with it. You just need to see that it is not the voice of truth. It is a habit. A habit can be very strong, but it is still just a habit. When you start living with that attitude, something interesting happens. The toxic thoughts still appear, but their weight slowly decreases because they are no longer being fueled by panic, by anger at yourself, by the moments you judge yourself with, "Oh my God, why am I still thinking like this? I'm terrible." Instead, each time you recognize them, you are planting a different kind of seed, a seed of clarity, of compassion for yourself, of the right to choose again. Jung's words, "I am what I choose to become," were never meant to make us deny the past, but to remind us of this. You don't have to keep living as a victim of old stories. Your own mind keeps retelling. You can be the one who sits down, looks at each story, and gently says to yourself, "That's enough. I understand why these lines were born. I understand why I believed them back then. But from now on, I will not let them be the only voice anymore. That is not some fake, sugary positivity. It is a very quiet kind of mental discipline, very stoic, the discipline of choosing what deserves to stay in the garden of your mind, and what should simply be acknowledged and then let go tonight. Before you sleep, if a toxic thought comes back, you can try whispering a very small sentence. This is not the whole of me. This is just an old thought. I see it. I don't need to run from it, and I don't need to kneel to it. Just one light sentence like that. But every time you truly feel it, you are shifting the center of your life from being dragged around by thoughts to the place where you see the thoughts, and begin preparing for the right to live differently in the next parts. We will go deeper into the pains never spoken aloud, the quiet wounds lying underneath those thoughts. But right now, you only need to realize one thing. The sentences that exhaust you most in your head are not always the truth. They are just guests who have stayed too long, and you, tonight, can begin learning to look at them, smile a little, and know that you are not obligated to keep living according to their story anymore. Once you begin to understand that I am not every thought in my head, another question usually arrives very quickly. So what am I supposed to do with the terrible, repetitive thoughts? Because no matter how much theory you understand, the reality is still this. There are self-judging sentences that keep coming back, right at your weakest moments. Lines like, I'm not good enough, I'll probably never change, this is just the kind of person I am. They don't just show up once. They become a kind of mental background music that you've been listening to for years. And what wears you out is not only the content of those sentences, but the war you start with yourself every time they appear. Stop overthinking. I have to be more positive. Don't be weak. You get stuck between two sides. On one side, the toxic thoughts. On the other, the whip of self-punishment for even daring to have those thoughts. There is a truth that hurts a little, but is also deeply freeing. Sentences like, I'm not enough, I'll always be this way, are not absolute truths about who you are. They are stories that have been repeated so many times that the mind can no longer tell the difference. Somewhere in the past, maybe someone said something about you. Maybe it was a casual criticism, an offhand comparison, a judgment that seemed to pass and be forgotten. But the mind recorded it, it replayed it, it turned it into a label. Over time, the outer voice went quiet, only the inner voice remained, and you started to believe you were born that way. Jung once said a line that I think fits this part very well. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. If you look closely, this sentence does not deny the past. It doesn't say what happened to you means nothing. It simply, quietly reminds you that the events that happened, the words that were spoken, the wounds you received, all of them are part of your history, but they are not the whole of you. You are not defined by what others once did to you, or by the older versions of yourself from when you did not yet understand enough, were not yet mature enough, did not yet have many choices. You are defined much more by what you choose to believe next, by how you treat yourself from this point on, by the small directions you choose each day. And yet, every time a toxic thought appears, we tend to do the opposite. We treat it like a verdict. We take it as the real truth. We give it the right to define our entire life path. For example, you fail at something at work. Instead of simply acknowledging, okay, this time I didn't do as well as I wanted, the mind chooses a hammer sentence. I am a failure from a single specific event. The thought jumps straight to a total conclusion about who you are. And then, instead of looking at what you could do differently, you sink into guilt and shame and let the sentence, "I am a failure," become a track on endless repeat. People often tell each other, "Just stop thinking negatively." On the surface, it sounds reasonable, but in reality, trying to not think about something usually makes it stand out even more. The more you remind yourself, "Don't think you're not enough," the more the sentence, "I'm not enough," gets repeated one more time in your head. The more you force yourself to be positive, the wider the gap grows between what you truly feel inside and what you show on the outside, until you begin to feel fake, even with yourself, not because you're a bad person, but because that way of approaching it is simply too exhausting. Stoicism does not teach us to force every negative thought to disappear. They did not sit there repeating, "Everything's fine, everything's good, just be happy." They chose another way, observation. Observation, not to analyze every tiny detail, but to see clearly. This is just one type of thought. It is not a command. It does not force me to obey. Epictetus reminded his students that we cannot control which thoughts appear, but we can learn not to sign a contract with all of them. You can imagine your mind as a garden. In that garden, there are plants you truly want to grow: self-respect, honesty, the ability to admit mistakes without destroying yourself, the belief that you can still grow and improve. But at the same time, there are also many weeds, old beliefs, judgments you picked up from other people, hasty conclusions you once stuck onto yourself on very exhausted days. Weeds don't disappear just because you hate them. The more you stand in the middle of the garden, staring at the weeds and shouting, "Go away, go away, why are you still here?" the more they stay. You're the only one getting more drained. The garden doesn't need someone screaming. The garden needs someone who can see clearly. "Ah, this patch is weeds. Ah, this one is a plant I want to keep. Ah, that corner needs to be cleared a bit." And then, little by little, you start to tend it, not by cutting everything down in one night, but by pulling out a few weeds each day, giving a bit more soil, a bit more water, a bit more light to the plants you genuinely value. It's the same in your inner life. Pulling out weeds is not scolding yourself every time a negative thought appears. Pulling out weeds begins with the ability to recognize, to look at a thought and call it by its name, to distinguish what is an old belief, what is a borrowed voice from someone else, and what is something you truly want to keep. For example, when a line like, "Look at yourself, you've never done anything that truly matters," shows up, instead of instantly believing it, you can pause for a beat and quietly say to yourself, "This is the kind of self-diminishing thought I've gotten used to hearing for many years." Asterisk, just that. You don't have to rush to prove that you're capable. And you don't have to immediately come up with 10 counter-arguments. At first, it's simply about recognizing, this is a clump of weeds in the garden of my mind. Once you stop confusing weeds with plants, you're already halfway there. A common mistake when people start working with their thoughts is trying to replace everything with positive affirmations they don't actually believe, while it's still hurting inside. Their mouth has to repeat, "I'm amazing, I'm fine, everything is great." This lack of alignment makes the mind even more exhausted. You don't need a bright, glossy coat of paint over a wall that's still damp. The Stoics chose a gentler way. Instead of forcing themselves to think differently right away, they practiced living differently, little by little. They let small actions become new evidence. And then, the mind slowly adjusts its story. But to reach that step, we first have to pass through this very quiet one, seeing toxic thoughts clearly without having to fight them. Tonight, you don't need to purify your entire mind. You only need to do one very small thing, like a subtle exercise for your inner world. Pay attention to which self-judging sentence repeated the most throughout your day. It might be, I'm always like this. They're probably tired of me. No one really needs me anyway. Pick just one. Then, instead of trying to stop it from appearing, just watch it every time it comes back. Ah, there it is. The old story. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to argue with it. Just recognize it is not the voice of truth. It is a habit. A habit can be very strong, but it's still just a habit. When you start living with that attitude, something interesting happens. The toxic thoughts still appear, but their heaviness decreases little by little, because they are no longer being fueled by panic, by anger at yourself, by those moments you judge yourself with, oh my God, how can I still think like this? I'm awful. Instead, each time you recognize them, you are planting a different kind of seed, a seed of clarity, of compassion toward yourself, of the right to choose again. When Jung said, I am what I choose to become, it wasn't to make us deny the past, but to remind us of this. You don't have to keep living as a victim of old stories. Your own mind keeps retelling. You can be the one who sits down, looks at each story, and gently says to yourself, that's enough. I understand why these lines were born. I understand why I believed them back then. But from now on, I won't let them be the only voice anymore. That's not sugary, superficial, positivize ty. It's a very quiet kind of mental discipline. Very stoic, the discipline of choosing what truly deserves to stay in the garden of your mind, and what should simply be acknowledged and then let go. Tonight, before you fall asleep, if a toxic thought comes back, you can try whispering a very small sentence. This is not the whole of me. This is just an old thought. I see it. I don't need to run from it, and I don't need to kneel before it. Just one soft sentence like that. But each time you truly feel it, you are shifting the center of your life from being dragged around by thoughts to the place where you see the thoughts and begin preparing for the right to live differently. In the next parts, we will go deeper into the pains never spoken aloud, the quiet wounds lying beneath those thoughts. But right now, you only need to see one thing. The sentences that exhaust you most in your head are not always the truth. They are just guests who have stayed too long, and you, tonight, can begin learning to look at them. Offer the slightest smile, and know that you are not obligated to keep living according to their story anymore. There are some forms of exhaustion that don't come from what has happened, but from everything that has never been spoken. The times you felt hurt, but just laughed it off. The times your heart ached a little, but you stayed quiet, afraid of making it a big deal. The moments you wanted to say, I'm sad, but changed it to, it's okay, I'm fine. Each time passes, and on the surface it looks like you've become stronger, but inside, something keeps quietly accumulating. Not one big wound, but hundreds, thousands of tiny scratches. One day, you realize you're strangely tired, not because anything particularly bad happened today, but because inside, there are too many things that have never been given a name. People often think that speaking up is the hard part, but in truth, what's harder is allowing yourself to admit that some things are worth speaking up about. Because the moment a feeling rises, old habits jump in immediately. Forget it. It's nothing. I'm making a fuss over nothing. What if they get annoyed if I say it? You don't just swallow your sadness. You swallow your right to feel sad at all. Anger gets swallowed. Feeling hurt gets swallowed. Disappointment in someone gets swallowed too, over time. You become someone very good at shutting down your own feelings, to the point that sometimes even you don't really know what exactly you're sad about, what you're angry at, where it actually hurts. You just know that you're not okay. There's something we are rarely taught. Suppressing emotions does not make them disappear. It just makes them move. They sink into the body, turning into a constant tiredness, those waves of tension with no clear reason. Those moments when your heart beats faster than usual, whenever something small happens, they slip into your nervous system, making you overreact to completely ordinary situations. A comment that seems harmless is enough to switch you into defense mode. A small change in plans is enough to make life feel like it's collapsing, not because you are overly weak, but because inside you, there is already too much that has never been looked at directly. Any extra impact, no matter how small, bumps into that hidden storage room and makes it spill over. Stoicism is often misunderstood as a school of thought that tells you, push all your feelings down, don't let anything show. But if you read carefully, you'll see they weren't promoting numbness. They were promoting the courage to face what's inside you honestly and clearly. Seneca once wrote about human fear and suffering. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This sentence does not say your pain is an illusion. Stop feeling it. It simply reminds us when we leave our emotions in the dark, unnamed, unexamined, our imagination turns them into something much more vague and enormous. A sadness that is never spoken can grow into the conclusion, maybe no one needs me at all. A moment of being treated badly that is never acknowledged can harden into the belief, I don't deserve to be respected. A feeling of being abandoned long ago that is never held and soothed can grow into a deep fear that haunts every relationship after that. Facing unspoken pain does not mean dragging every story out and shouting it to the world. It begins in a much quieter place, admitting to yourself that there are things that did hurt you. It sounds simple, but for many people, this is the hardest step, because the moment you think, I was really hurt by that, another part of you jumps in immediately. Come on, let it go. It's old news. I'm just being weak. It's nothing. Other people have it worse. You don't just deny the pain, you also deny its right to be acknowledged. True Stoicism does not teach us to reject our feelings. It teaches us to call them by their right names. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not for anyone else to read, but like an inner journal. He listed out what he was feeling, his irritations, his disappointments, the times he felt small and petty, the times life felt unfair. Why would an emperor need to do that with himself? Because he understood that if he was not honest about what was happening inside, those forces would control him without his knowledge. Writing them down did not make them vanish at once, but it pulled them out of the dark, laid them out on the table, where he could look at them, understand them, and walk through them. For us, writing it down or saying it out loud does not need to be some grand ceremony either. Sometimes, it's simply a small admission offered to yourself in that moment. I really was hurt. That situation hurt me more than I was willing to admit in that moment. I felt very alone. You don't have to post it online. You don't have to tell the whole world. You don't have to phrase it beautifully. You only need to stop playing the role of someone who feels nothing. Some silent pains are tied to other people. A friend who broke a promise, an ex who left without an explanation, a family member whose words made you curl up inside. Other silent pains are tied to yourself, a choice you still regret to this day, an opportunity you let pass. A time you treated someone badly and still feel ashamed about. The common thread is, they've never really been laid out on the table properly. They exist as quiet wounds deep inside, sometimes pulsing with a quick sting. But never once have you truly sat down and listened to them fully. Facing unspoken pain is not about reopening every wound just to torture yourself. It is a way to stop them from quietly controlling you from the shadows. When a sadness, an anger, a feeling of being abandoned is called by its true name, it loses some of its power. Asterisk, it no longer has to scream through outbursts, overreactions, or waves of anxiety with no clear cause. It returns to its actual size, a painful experience, but one with limits, with shape, with a place where you can gently rest your hand. Stoic, here, does not mean clench your jaw and endure in silence to look tough. Stoic, here, means being brave enough to look directly at what once hurt you, without sugarcoating it, without exaggerating it, and say, yes, that happened. Yes, I was hurt. But from now on, I want to learn not to let it decide all of my reactions anymore. That is not weakness. It is a form of mental discipline, because running away is easy, but sitting still with a wound long enough to understand it requires a great deal of courage. Tonight, I'm not asking you to reopen every old story, nor am I asking you to drown in the past. I'm only inviting you to do one small thing. Choose one thing you know did hurt you once, but that you have never truly acknowledged. It doesn't have to be the biggest story, as long as it's something that every time you think of it, your heart sinks just a little. Then, with as much honesty as you can, give it a name, maybe by saying it quietly in your mind, maybe by writing a single line. That experience made me really sad. That's all. Not to blame anyone, not to blame yourself, but so that, for the first time, that sadness is allowed to exist under your own gaze. When you do this, there might be a bit of pain, a tightness in your throat, a hint of tears wanting to come out. That does not mean you're getting weaker. It simply means the parts inside you are finally allowed to breathe, to speak, to be acknowledged. Yes, I really did suffer back then. From there, a small, empty space opens up for micro-healing, a kind of healing that is very small, very gentle, but real. It might be nothing more than one deeper breath, a sense that your shoulders have loosened just a little, a passing thought, oh, so all this time, I've been too silent with myself. Stoicism does not say you have to rise above your pain in an instant. It simply reminds us, if we dare to step into it, dare to stay with it long enough without running away, we will find that on the other side of that pain, there is a part of us that is more mature, more grounded, and understands us better. Facing unspoken pain does not turn the past into something that never happened. It just helps you stop unconsciously paying the same price for the same old wound over and over again. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the past and the ghosts that are still being replayed in your mind, many years after everything happened. But before we go there, tonight, if you can, give yourself the chance to look back at one small pain, name it, and whisper, I see you now. From this moment on, I won't force you to stay silent forever. Just that much is already a big step on the path to living more honestly with your own heart. There are things that happened long ago, so long ago that if someone asked for the exact date, you probably wouldn't remember. But just one small detail hits the right spot, a name, a sentence, a familiar situation, and something inside you vibrates in a strange way. Part hurt, part embarrassment, part feeling like you've been pulled back into an old version of yourself. You know it's in the past. You know you can't go back and fix it, and yet, the mind still has the habit of replaying the same memory, the same unfinished conversation, the same mistake you've already paid for, as if watching it a few more times would somehow make it hurt less. But strangely, the more you replay it, the smaller you feel. The thinner you feel, and the more harshly you judge yourself. There are nights when you're not worried about the future, not thinking too much about the present, but you get pulled back into one old moment, a time you said something you shouldn't have said, a time you stayed silent when you should have spoken up, a choice that, looking back now, you wish you'd made differently. The mind eagerly rebuilds the entire scene, every word, every expression, every wave of shame, every heartbeat dropping in your chest. You watch it like watching a clip, but it's a clip with only one person on the operating table, the you from back then, and every time you replay it, it's not to hold that version of you, but to judge it again, condemn it again, conclude again. I really was awful back then. No wonder things are the way they are now. I guess I was just born like this. We often think we're revisiting the past to understand more, to learn more, to draw lessons. It sounds very mature, but if you look closely, not every time we go back there is truly for learning. Many times we go back simply to hurt ourselves again. We stand in the present, wearing the judging eyes of who we are now, and look back at a much younger version of ourselves. Then use today's standards to pass judgment on the child we once were inside. That child did not know what you know now, did not have the experiences you have now, was not calm enough yet, not skilled enough yet, not strong enough yet, but instead of understanding that, we assign ourselves the role of judge, and in that courtroom, there is only one person on trial. Epictetus once said, "People are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. The past is made of events that have already closed. They do not climb out of their graves to haunt you. What truly haunts you is the way you retell them, the angle you hold them from, and the role you choose for yourself every time the story is replayed. If every time you return to an old memory, you step into the role of the accuser, the past will always be a prison. If one day you can go back as the observer, or the one who is learning, or the one who knows how to hold and comfort, the past will still be the past, but your relationship with it will no longer be the same. The past does not change. What happened is still what happened. The words that were spoken cannot be taken back. The choices that were made cannot be replayed on the same board, but there is one thing that can absolutely change the way you stand in the present. And look back at those things. You can stand there as someone who is still punishing themselves every day for what has passed, or you can begin to stand there as someone who has suffered enough, understood enough, and now wants to keep living more kindly toward themselves. Letting go does not mean you deny that back then, that really mattered, or that person once meant a lot to me. Letting go also does not mean you pretend nothing ever happened. Letting go, in a more subtle sense, simply means stopping the habit of allowing what has passed to define who you are forever. Stopping the habit of letting one old mistake decide what you deserve in the present. Stopping the habit of letting someone who once treated you badly keep narrating the rest of your life story when they are not even here anymore. Stopping the habit of paying an endless price for a pain you have, in truth, already paid for long ago. I know. Just hearing the phrase, "let go," already feels heavy for many people, because inside, a small question rises. If I let go, does that mean I'm making light of what I went through? If I stop thinking about that person, that story, does that mean I'm betraying my own feelings? The answer is not as simple as no. Don't worry, but there is something you can quietly consider. Maybe what you went through deserves to be respected, remembered, acknowledged, but that does not mean you must let it govern every decision from here on. Some things deserve to be placed on a shelf, to be dusted from time to time, kept as part of your memory. But if you keep holding them in your hands forever, you will have no hands left to receive anything new. Forgiveness, especially forgiving yourself, is therefore not a weak act. It is a demanding but deeply worthwhile mental discipline. Forgiving others does not mean you decide what they did was okay. It only means you no longer want to keep letting them live rent-free in your mind, deciding your moods, and distorting your sense of who you are any further. Forgiving yourself is even harder because the person you struggle most to forgive is often you, the version who chose wrongly, who missed the opportunity, who hurt someone else, who hurt yourself. Forgiving yourself does not mean erasing all responsibility. It also does not mean standing in the middle of your life and declaring, "What I did back then was perfectly fine." Forgiving yourself is like walking into a room where an old version of you is sitting there, head down in shame, in regret, in exhaustion, and instead of scolding them again, you sit down next to them and gently say, "Yeah, you really did mess up. Yeah, that was not okay. But I understand why you were like that back then, and from now on, I'm not going to use this stick to beat you for the rest of our life anymore. I want to use what happened to live more kindly, not to keep punishing us forever." That is discipline, choosing not to torture yourself anymore. Even though that way of living feels familiar, the Stoics were very realistic about the past. They didn't sugarcoat it, and they didn't tear it to pieces either. They looked at it as a piece of data. It happened. It hurt. I understood something more because of it. And now I am here, standing in front of a new day. If there was a mistake, they looked for ways to make amends. If it could not be fixed, they looked for ways to live better from this point onward. What they did not do was pitch a tent there and live forever as someone who only knows how to say, "Back then, because, as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the only time you truly have is the present. The past is gone, the future is not here yet. Only now is the place where you can actually act tonight." I'm not asking you to forget everything that happened. You can't, and you don't need to. I'm only inviting you to look again at the relationship you currently have with your past, maybe. Instead of letting it stand there like a ghost that makes you feel smaller every time it is mentioned, you can begin to see it as a very strict teacher whose lesson has ended. Asterisk. You don't need to sit in that old classroom forever. You can step out, carry what you need to carry, and keep walking if you can. Tonight, you might try a very small, very private exercise. Think of an old story that you know still haunts you. It doesn't have to be the heaviest thing, just something that, whenever it comes up, makes you feel like you've lost points in your own eyes. Then, instead of replaying the entire story with every little detail, you only need to ask yourself a few very short questions. Back then, what did I not know that I know now? Back then, what was I afraid of that I can name more clearly today? If a close friend told me they had done exactly the same thing, would I want them to be self-punishing for the rest of their life? You don't have to answer quickly. Just listen sincerely to whatever rises up. Maybe, somewhere in that stream of answers, something will soften a little. Letting go of the past is not a one-time operation. It's more like a process where each day you choose your position again, not turning your back and pretending nothing happened, but also not kneeling at its feet, letting it define every breath, every decision. You stand upright, look back, and nod. Yeah, that is part of me. But that's not all I am. I am also what I can still do from tomorrow onward. In the next chapter, we'll move closer to a character who has been walking with you this whole way. The inner critic, the voice that keeps whispering that you're not enough. You're falling behind. Nothing you do will matter. Many of the ghosts of the past are speaking through that exact voice. But before we go there, right now, you can quietly whisper to yourself one small sentence. There are things I've already paid for. From now on, I want to learn to live as someone who respects the past, but no longer lets it hold the keys to my life. If that sentence can stay with you tonight, then the past has already lost a little bit of its power. At some point, if you pay attention long enough, you'll notice inside your mind there aren't only thoughts, not only memories, but also a very familiar voice. That voice speaks in your voice, but what it usually says is, you're falling behind. You're still not enough. It's pointless to even try. Everyone else is already too far ahead. It doesn't shout. It whispers, and precisely because it whispers, you're more likely to believe this must be the truth. The ironic thing is, that voice often shows up wearing a very reasonable mask. It says, I'm just reminding you to try harder. If I'm not tough on you, you'll get lazy, you'll lose to everyone else. It calls itself motivation, but every time it speaks, what's left in you afterward is usually a sense of inadequacy, fear, hesitation to begin, hesitation to try again, and a vague shame toward yourself. If it were real motivation, it should make you feel lighter, clearer, more grounded. Instead, it makes you shrink, grow thinner, and see yourself as someone who is always not enough yet. That inner judging voice rarely appears out of nowhere. It is built little by little from many sources. The years in school when you were compared to others, the times you were criticized and no one showed you how to do better. They only said, wrong, terrible. The offhand comments from family, like, look at other people's kids. Is that really all you can do? The hours scrolling online, seeing everyone else so capable, so fast, and you conclude, I must be the only one who's useless. All of that, running long enough in the background, one day crystallizes into an internal voice. No one else needs to criticize you anymore. You criticize yourself. No one needs to compare you anymore. You walk yourself over, put yourself next to someone else, and declare that you've lost. There is something rather cruel we often do to ourselves. We think that if we want to improve, we have to hit ourselves hard. No being satisfied. No allowing ourselves to feel proud. No acknowledging what we've already managed to do. We must always find what's not good enough, not big enough, not worthy enough. We're afraid that if we're a little gentle with ourselves, if we feel a bit of gratitude toward ourselves, if we pause to recognize what we've already survived, we'll slacken, become lazy, fall behind. So we hand the stick to the inner critic and tell it, go ahead and beat me, so I don't dare stop. But we forget one thing. People cannot grow on fear and shame forever. At some point, fear stops pushing you forward and starts draining you dry. Marcus Aurelius once wrote to himself, don't be a harsher judge of yourself than you are of others. If you pay attention, you'll notice you're often very generous with the people you care about. They fail. You say, it's okay. You'll try again next time. They're tired. You say, rest. You've already tried so hard. They mess up. You comfort them. You didn't know any better back then. Stop beating yourself up. But when that person is you, you rarely speak with the same gentleness. You use a different set of words. You deserve this. You really are useless. How could you be so stupid? Those sentences, repeated long enough, become the thing that shapes how you see yourself at a very deep level. So what do we do with that endlessly judging voice? Most people's first reaction is, tell it to shut up. But the more you try to force it silent, the more it tries to prove it has the right to be there. The more you argue with it head-on, the more you get stuck in an endless internal debate. It says, you're not enough. You argue, no, I am enough. It brings out its evidence. You dig up your achievements, and in the end, your whole day still revolves around one topic. So, am I enough or not? This is where Stoicism offers a different direction. Instead of trying to gag the inner critic, you change the way you live. So you quietly create new evidence. Instead of arguing, I'm not useless, you start doing one small thing that someone not useless would do. Begin something, finish one step, keep one small promise to yourself. Not perfectly, not spectacularly, just one step that is real. Each time the inner critic says, it won't lead anywhere anyway. If you stay sitting there, arguing until you win, you'll be exhausted. But if, instead, you gently do the opposite, you still send the email that needs to be sent, still study the lesson that needs to be studied, still show up for the workout you planned, still complete one small part of your project, you are letting your actions speak on your behalf. At that point, the inner critic might still mutter, but you're doing so little. Other people are doing way more. Let it. You don't need to beat it in a debate. You only need to keep living in the direction you know is right for you. Over time, between all the lines it repeats, the mind itself will have to admit, looks like they're actually still moving forward. Seneca once wrote, we become brave by doing brave acts. The same is true for belief in yourself. We don't wait until we are completely confident to finally take action. We act while we're still shaking, still doubting ourselves, while the inner critic is still talking steadily in the background. Each time we do, we add a new piece of data to the system. I started even though I was scared. I came back after stepping away. I apologized when I was wrong. These pieces of data, if repeated often enough, will slowly weaken the absolute conclusions like, I always quit, I never do anything that matters. They don't disappear overnight, but they stop being the only voice. The inner critic will always try to drag you toward two extremes. Either you must be perfect, or you're worthless. Miss by a little, and you're a failure. Make a small mistake, and everything is ruined. Stoicism reminds us of a different attitude, choosing progress over perfection. Progress means today is a little better than yesterday, even if only by a tiny bit. Perfection means you're not allowed to be wrong. If you live for perfection, your inner critic will always find a reason to conclude that you are lacking. If you live for progress, every mistake becomes data, a step, a lesson. You can still feel regret, but you no longer need to turn it into a life sentence. A very practical way to dialogue with your inner critic is not to sit there arguing until it goes silent, but to recognize it. This voice speaking right now isn't my calm voice. It's the inner critic. Listen in the right dose. If there's 1% truth in what it says about something you genuinely need to adjust, you can note that part. The rest, the insults, the put-downs, the unreasonable comparisons, you don't need to carry with you. Answer with small actions. Do one thing that you know aligns with self-respect. Finish a task you've been putting off. Say one kind sentence to yourself. Refuse to quit halfway just because you feel not good enough. You don't need to turn this into a grand slogan. You just need to repeat it enough times for the mind to gradually realize, there is a part of me that no longer listens to the inner critic. That part is living by a different standard. The important thing is, you don't have to wait until you're no longer afraid, no longer judged from within. Before you begin to live, you can start right now in the state of scared, but doing it anyway. The inner critic might still say, this won't lead anywhere, but you act. It might say, look at you. You're not on anyone's level, but you still keep your small commitments to yourself. Each time you do that, you're not only doing something externally, you're also rewriting your inner story. From I'm someone who always quits, to I'm someone who knows how to come back. From I'm someone who is never enough, to I'm someone who keeps going, even while I'm not enough yet. Tonight, you can try listening to your inner critic once, but not to believe it, and not to fear it, just to recognize it. Notice which lines it likes to use most. Where does it usually attack me? Whose voice from the past does this voice sound like? Just by answering a few questions like that, you've already created a small distance between you and that voice. After that, choose one very small thing to do tomorrow that you know the inner critic won't like, but the more mature part of you knows is right. Sending an email you're afraid to send. Finishing a piece of work that's half done. Giving yourself a real break without calling it lazy. When you've done it, resist the urge to say, big deal, that's nothing to be proud of. Allow yourself to look at it directly and acknowledge, no matter what the inner critic says, I still chose to take one small step toward the life I want. That is how someone living in the Stoic spirit answers the judging voice within, not with a war of words, but with steadiness, with repeated actions, with the decision, day after day, to build new proof for yourself that I'm not perfect, but I am changing, and that matters. In the next chapter, we'll explore a quiet inner skill that helps you become less vulnerable to the pull of the inner critic. Inner stillness, because when it's a bit quieter inside, the judging voice no longer owns the entire stage. There are days when you turn off all the external noise. You don't see anyone, no meetings, no ringing phones, no new notifications. Everything around you is relatively calm. And yet, strangely, inside you, it still feels like standing in the middle of a packed intersection. Thoughts jostling, worries piling on, one task dragging another behind it. Worst-case scenarios appearing on repeat. You're in a quiet room, and still it feels like you're drifting through chaos. In those moments, you start to see a truth that's a little bitter. The problem isn't how noisy the outside is. It's how noisy it is inside. The world today worships busyness. People show off packed schedules, stacked deadlines, projects lined up, back if you stop. Take a day off, say no to a few things, turn your phone off for a few hours. A quick little voice rises inside. Am I being lazy? What if everyone else is already way ahead? If I pause, what if I get left behind? So we slowly learn to feel guilty whenever we're not busy. The feeling of quiet becomes something we struggle to allow, not because we don't like peace, but because every time things get quiet, the noise inside starts to show itself. But notice this, the most important decisions, the moments you see yourself most clearly, the times you genuinely realize something, rarely happen when you're sprinting at full speed. They usually come in those spaces where no one is rushing you. No noise is dragging you along, when your mind is forced to face itself, with nowhere left to hide. And that's when you realize stillness is not an empty, meaningless gap, but the place where the deepest things in you finally have a chance to step forward. From a Stoic point of view, stillness, inner quiet, is not some luxury state reserved for people who have nothing to do. It is a core capacity, the capacity to sit with yourself, even while it's still loud inside. The capacity to not react immediately, but to give yourself a tiny pause between stimulus and response. The capacity to see your thoughts and feelings without letting them drag you around like before. Marcus Aurelius, even while living in the middle of power, war, and duty, still wrote to himself, "Nowhere you can go will offer you a quieter retreat than into your own soul. No place," he reminds himself, "will offer you a calmer refuge than your own inner life." He didn't live on a mountain, didn't run away from the world, but he understood that if there is no quiet place inside, then no matter where you go, who you're with, or how peaceful the surroundings look, your mind will still be carrying its own storm. We often misunderstand and think stillness means a blank mind, no thoughts, no feelings. So each time we sit down, try to be silent for a moment, and thoughts immediately rush in. We quickly conclude, "I failed. I can't be still. My mind is a mess." But stillness is not the state of having no thoughts. It's the state of knowing that you're thinking, without having to chase every thought that appears. Not running away from what's inside, but staying there with it, watching it come and go. Imagine, inside you, there is a sky. Thoughts, feelings, worries, memories are the clouds passing through. Some days, they're thick, darker, heavier. Some days, they're thin, light. Bright stillness does not require you to push all the clouds away until only blue sky remains. Stillness is the ability to watch the clouds and remember, I am the sky, not the clouds. Clouds change, come and go. The sky remains, holding everything. From the outside, stillness looks like doing nothing. But from the inside, stillness is a very serious kind of mental work, because to sit with yourself for just 5 to 10 minutes, without scrolling, without turning something on, without grabbing the nearest distraction, you have to move against the habits of an entire world that keeps teaching you that you only have value when you're busy. To me, that is a form of courage. Epictetus saw very clearly the link between reaction and inner freedom. He reminded his students that we cannot control everything that happens, but we can learn not to react blindly. Stillness is exactly that. Pause. The moment when you don't immediately leap into your first emotion. The moment you notice, I'm about to get angry. I'm about to run away from this. With just that one beat of awareness, anger, fear, and impulsiveness lose some of their grip in the rhythm of life today. Stillness is often seen as some kind of mental luxury. You can only be still when you're free. You calm down first, then you practice. But in truth, stillness is not the reward at the end of the journey. It's one of the tools that lets you walk that journey without burning out too quickly. Just like you don't wait until you're fully healthy to start resting, it's resting at the right time that helps you become healthier. You also don't need to wait until your mind is calm to practice stillness. It's precisely by practicing small moments of quiet while your mind is still loud that you train this capacity. Stillness, when you look at it in a very practical way, really just begins with a few minutes a day. No special space needed, no complicated ritual, just a small slice of time when you intentionally do nothing else, except be present with yourself. Maybe it's 5 minutes before you sleep, 5 minutes after you wake up, or a moment in the middle of the day when you can slow down. In those few minutes, thoughts still arise, Memories still come. Worries still drop by. You don't push them away. You also don't cling to them to analyze. You simply notice, I'm thinking about this. I'm worried about that. There's a bit of sadness in me. Then let them pass. Like someone sitting by a river, watching the water flow at first. You might feel uncomfortable, sitting still for a few minutes while your mind feels like a marketplace. Your chest feels hot. Your body just wants to get up and do something. That does not mean you're not cut out for meditation, or that your mind is too messy to fix it. Only means you've gone a very long time without being alone with yourself. That restlessness is like the first time you use a muscle you've never trained before. It hurts, but it's the kind of hurt that comes from waking up. If you are patient with those few minutes each day, something very subtle will begin to happen. You no longer react as explosively to everything as before, not because you've become a cold person, but because between the event and your reaction, there is suddenly an extra layer of awareness. You might still feel angry, but in the middle of that anger, there's a small part of you that knows, I'm being poked right where I was already hurt before. You might still feel sad, but the sadness no longer sweeps you away completely. There is a part of you that is holding that very sadness. Stillness doesn't erase emotions, but it gives you a steadier ground to feel them from. When stillness becomes a small habit, 5 to 10 minutes a day, it won't just stay inside those pauses. It will start walking with you into everyday life. In a heated discussion, you feel less need to win and more desire to understand. In an unpleasant surprise, you feel less shattered and a bit more able to ask yourself, from where I'm standing, what can I do now? On the tired days, you judge yourself less and offer yourself a little more gentleness. You don't become someone who is no longer affected by life, but each impact doesn't break you the way it used to. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself many times to return to that inner quiet whenever he was swept up by work, by pressure, by people. He wrote it down as a personal reminder. Go back to the refuge within, the place no one else can touch, where you are allowed to see everything more clearly and at the same time more lightly. We are not emperors, but we also have a place like that. We just rarely give ourselves the chance to step into it tonight. I'm not asking you to become some expert meditator, and I'm not asking you to turn your life into another mind training project. I'm only inviting you to try something very simple before you sleep. When things are relatively quiet, give yourself 5 minutes sitting or lying down in a state where you're not doing anything else except noticing what is happening inside. No need to fix anything. No need to breathe with perfect technique. No need for achievements. Just notice. Inside me, there is this worry. Inside me, there's that old hurt. Inside me, there's a small sense of gratitude for something that happened today. Once you've noticed, you don't have to cling to it. You also don't have to push it away. Let it pass through naturally. If you can keep this small habit, one day, when life throws a bigger storm at you, you may be surprised by how you stay standing. Not because you don't hurt, but because inside you, there is already a pocket of quiet you've been training. That quiet place won't save you from every storm, but it gives you somewhere solid to stand, so you're not swept away completely, so that even if you fall, you still know the path to stand back up again, slowly but genuinely. Stillness, in the Stoic sense, is not removing yourself from life. It is carrying a quiet place inside as you live within life, so that even in the loudest places, you can still find a small patch of calm for yourself, so that even in your most tangled moods, you still have a silent anchor deep underneath. In the next chapter, we'll talk about something tightly connected to this stillness. Your attention, the quiet force that is constantly building your entire inner world where you look most often. Your inner life will slowly take that shape. As for tonight, if you can, give yourself a few small minutes to stop trying to become anyone and simply, quietly, sit with yourself and whisper, even if it's still noisy inside, I still deserve a small pocket of quiet. And from these tiny moments of quiet, one day, I'll find my way back to the steadiness I've long believed I don't have. There is something very few people clearly tell us. Your mind does not build your inner world from objective truth. It builds it from whatever you look at the most. Same life, same day, same circumstances. But if you constantly zoom in on what is missing, what is broken, what is wrong, then slowly, inside you, a very real sense will form that my life is nothing but lack, brokenness, and mistakes. Not because your life has nothing else in it, but because that is what you have unconsciously trained your mind to pay attention to every day from a spiritual perspective. Attention is like a beam of light where you shine it. That area lights up. Everything else, even though it still exists, fades in your experience. If every day you examine your failures in great detail, your weaknesses, the criticisms you've received, your brain will become a fault-finding expert wherever you go. You'll see yourself as less than someone. Whatever you do, your first habit will be to scan for how it might go wrong. When you look at yourself, what appears is a list of things not there yet, not enough yet, not worthy yet. Not because your life is made only of bad things, but because the inner spotlight has almost only ever pointed one way. On the other hand, if little by little you start shifting your attention toward the things that are slowly healing, slowly improving, quietly meaningful, your brain will begin to lay down new pathways, noticing one small thing you did better than yesterday, seeing a limit you've come a bit closer to, registering a moment when you chose kindness instead of reacting on autopilot. These things may be very small, but when they are granted the staying power of your attention, they no longer just pass by and disappear. They become a positive part of how you see yourself. Seneca once wrote, "Where you choose to place your attention, there your mind will live." If day after day, your mind lives in the territories of comparison, doubt, and self-contempt, it's no surprise that inside you there is a constant sense of not enough, not worthy, not at peace. But if, little by little, you let your mind live more often in places where there is gratitude, acknowledgement, and a sense of progress, your inner experience will begin to change color. Not because all difficulties vanish, but because you no longer see only one color. There is a very important line to draw here. None of this is about toxic positivity. It's not about closing your eyes to pain and problems. Toxic positivity happens when you use a few empty, comforting phrases to slap over a reality that is still deeply hurting. When you force yourself to be happy, to smile, to be fine, while inside things have not yet been truly seen and honored. What we're talking about here is a very sober kind of discipline. The discipline of choosing what deserves to be looked at for a long time. Attention is a form of energy. Wherever that energy goes, that place gets fed. If you stare for a long time at your own weaknesses, your insecurity gets fed. If you stare for a long time at other people's mistakes, your bitterness gets fed. If you stare for a long time at comparisons, at all the why are they like that, and I'm only like this, envy and self-diminishing get fed. In contrast, if you start training yourself to look longer at things that, though small, are meaningful, your steadiness and sense of appreciation begin to be fed. Marcus Aurelius, in the lines he wrote only for himself, reminded himself many times of this. Pay attention to what lies within your control, to the quality of your actions, to the question of how closely you are living in line with your values. He did not deny what is unfair, unpredictable, chaotic, but he chose not to let all of his attention be swallowed by what he could not touch. That is a form of protecting his inner world. For us, shifting our attention is not a dramatic turn we make in a single day. It comes from things that are very small, very ordinary. When something goes wrong, instead of only repeating, "I'm terrible," you also look at, "What did I manage to do here? What can I adjust next time?" When someone is ahead of you, instead of stopping at the conclusion, "I've lost," you can also notice, how far have I actually come? When a day ends, instead of only remembering what went wrong, you ask yourself one more thing. Today, even if it's tiny, what is one thing I did that wasn't so bad? At first glance, it may seem insignificant, but each time you consciously turn the inner spotlight just a little, you're training yourself in a new habit, not letting your mind be just a fault scanner, but becoming someone who knows how to choose a more helpful angle. Epictetus reminded his students of a simple reality. We do not control everything that happens, but we always have the power to choose where we spend our mind. That power is small, but it is the root of much of our freedom. If you pour all your mental energy into things you cannot control, you will constantly feel helpless, swept away. If you gradually shift part of your attention toward what you can do within your own small sphere, you begin to feel the weight of your own presence in your own life. This does not mean we ignore problems and only look at what is nice. A Stoic is not someone who pretends everything is fine. They see very clearly both the dark parts and the light. The difference is, they do not let the dark part consume their whole view, and they intentionally nourish the light so they still have the strength to face the dark tonight. Instead of trying to think positive, I invite you to try a small exercise in attention. When you look back on your day, your mind will naturally rush to a few things that went wrong. A small mistake, someone who irritated you, a task you left unfinished. You don't need to deny them, just acknowledge them. Then ask yourself one more question. Today, even if it's small, what in me was moving in the right direction? It might be you said no to something you no longer had the energy to do. You held back from speaking harshly to someone the way you used to. You finished a piece of work that you used to always postpone. It doesn't have to be big. Just one thing. Then allow your attention to stay with that one thing a little longer than usual. Not to erase all difficulty, but to remind your mind, my life is not only made of mistakes and lack. There are also movements that are very small, but real. If you do that small exercise every day, slowly, a new kind of balance will form inside. You still see what needs adjusting, but you no longer define yourself only by what isn't right yet. You still notice what is not as you wish, but you no longer completely overlook what is quietly getting better. That is not painting everything pink. It is a fuller honesty about your life. Intentional attention is not a flashy skill. It is a repeated habit. Each time your mind charges off in its usual direction of blame, comparison, worst-case conclusions, you gently catch yourself and turn the inner spotlight a few degrees. Is there anything else here that's also worth looking at more closely? You won't always find something. Asterisk, but each time you do, you are changing the way your mind builds your inner world. In the previous chapters, we've spent a lot of time talking about thoughts, about silent pain, about the past, about the inner critic, about stillness. All of that has been groundwork. Now, attention is like the hand placed on the steering wheel. You don't control every sharp turn in life, but you can choose which direction you're looking as you move through them. Tonight, before you sleep, if you'd like, you can whisper to yourself a very simple sentence. I'm going to practice choosing more carefully what truly deserves to be looked at for a long time, because wherever I place my attention, that is where my mind will live. You don't have to change everything in one night. You just need to know, from tonight on, that you have the right to gently turn the inner beam of light, so you don't see only darkness, but also the small points of light that are slowly growing inside your own life. By this point, you might be a little tired, not the kind of tired that comes from exhaustion, but the kind you feel after walking for quite a while through a very quiet place, inside yourself. From the beginning until now, we've touched on the repeating thoughts in your head, the toxic stories you once believed were truth, the pains you never spoke out loud, the ghosts of the past, the judging voice inside, the moments of stillness, and the way you place your attention. If all of that ends as nothing more than interesting ideas, they'll pass very quickly. But if you let them sink into how you live, even as tiny changes, then one day you'll realize you don't just understand your mind better, you know it in a completely different way. People often ask, how do I stop having negative thoughts? It's an understandable question, because everyone is tired of the noise in their head. But if we follow Stoic logic, the answer is not about twisting your mind until it finally thinks correctly the way you want. It lies in beginning to live differently, a little at a time, and letting new experiences rewrite the story inside. Clearing the mind is not staying up all night to correct every crooked thought, forcing them into a straight line. It is to one, realizing you are separate from your thoughts. You no longer automatically believe every sentence your mind speaks. You know there is a small distance between you and what you are currently thinking. That distance gives you the right to look, to register, to choose what to believe, or to let it pass. From being dragged around by thoughts, you become the observer, able to see even the old scripts that are still replaying. Daring to name what has never been spoken instead of pressing down every sadness, anger, and hurt. You begin to admit to yourself, yes, that really did hurt me. Yes, I was truly lonely then. You write it down, or whisper it in your heart, not to assign blame and not to drown in emotions, but so that this pain no longer has to hide. When it's named, it loses some of its power, and you are less likely to overreact to every small bump later. On 3. Stopping the habit of living forever in the past, and in the judging voice you still remember what happened, but you no longer stand there like someone sentencing yourself day after day. You begin to look at your past selves with eyes that are both honest and kinder. Yes, I was wrong, but I didn't know any better then. Now, I understand differently. The inner critic may still speak, but you no longer hand it all the power. You let small actions answer back instead, a task you complete with care, a moment where you dare to try again, a choice where you refuse to abandon yourself. You give yourself a few quiet minutes each day, not to become good at meditation, but to feel the flow inside you. You start learning how to sit still without rushing to silence. Every thought just watching them, knowing them, and letting them pass. You also start choosing more carefully where you place your attention, not only scanning for lack, but also noticing the small movements that are getting better in your life, not denying difficulties, but not letting them swallow your entire view. All of that, when taken together, creates a very quiet shift. From trying to change your thoughts to changing the way you live with yourself, Marcus Aurelius has a line that fits this ending very well. Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one. If we bring that into the inner world, it becomes a reminder. Don't spend your whole life arguing in your head about whether you're okay enough, worthy enough, thinking the right way or not. Let the way you treat yourself, the way you move through each day, slowly answer those questions instead. You don't need to wait until you're no longer scared, no longer noisy inside, no longer tangled, before you start living differently. The Stoics don't wait for the storm to pass before they walk. They learn to walk right in the storm, with steps that aren't very pretty, aren't very perfect, but real, steady, and present. You can too. Clearing the mind is not staying up all night forcing yourself to understand everything. Clearing the mind is living a little more honestly each day with what you think, with what you feel, with what you choose. Every time you notice you're speaking too harshly to yourself and choose to soften. Every time you're about to run away from an old sadness but instead decide to sit with it a little longer. Every time you want to replay the past for the 100th time but stop and come back to the present. Every time you give yourself a few quiet minutes in the middle of a chaotic day, each of those is a moment your mind is being cleared a little more, not by theory, but by lived experience. Tonight, you probably won't remember every chapter, every idea, every quote, and that doesn't matter. What matters more is what remains in you as a small feeling, the feeling that you are not the worst thoughts in your head, the feeling that you have the right to name your own pain, the feeling that you don't have to stand in the past forever, the feeling that you can say to your inner critic, I hear you, but I'm not living by your rules anymore. If even one of those feelings stays with you, then tonight already means something. When you close your eyes, your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift more softly. Allow yourself to set aside all the lessons, concepts, things to do, shoulds, and musts. A night is not an exam. Tonight is simply a moment where you lie down, knowing you are on your way to learning how to live more gently with yourself, and that alone is already more than enough for one day. Before you sink into sleep, if you'd like, you can whisper very softly, as if speaking directly to your own mind, tomorrow, I probably won't be completely different. I'll still have moments of overthinking, of self-blame, of replaying the past, of feeling tired of myself. But from today on, I know I have another choice: to see thoughts as thoughts, to see pain as pain, to see the past as the past, and day by day, to live a little more gently with this heart of mine. If that whisper makes your chest feel just a little lighter, let it be the last thing you hold on to before sleep. After that, let the rest belong to sleep and its work, your body resting, your mind reordering itself, everything you've heard tonight settling down, slowly finding its place somewhere deep within. Lucid dream, sleep, and science stories will still be here, like a friend sitting beside you on future nights. But for now, you don't need to do anything more. Just breathe slowly, soften your body, and allow yourself to drift into a sleep that is just a little calmer than the nights before. Everything that needs to continue, we'll walk on with on another night. Tonight, this is enough. May you have a beautiful dream.